There's a show on Netflix called The Trust, and I have a lot to say about it. It is a prisoner's dilemma-ish reality game show, and the rules of the game are surprisingly well designed. The way that the players played the game is kind of a train wreck. So I'll tell you about that, but I also want to look at the game from a game theory standpoint and talk about what forces are actually put on players playing this game and what it might look like to play the game well. The way this game works is that there is a pot of $250,000. There are initially 11 players. And every so often, about once an episode, I think, there is a voting ceremony where everybody can cast a vote simultaneously and secretly. And whoever gets the most votes is kicked out. So at the end of the show, so after 8 episodes, whoever is left, they get to split the amount of money that's in the pot. An important detail of the voting is that if someone is tied for the highest rather than uniquely has the highest votes, then nobody goes home. So for example, if nobody voted except one person voted for you and one person voted for me, we would be tied at 1-1 and no one would go home. Or we could be tied at 2-2 and no one would go home. And another important detail is that you are allowed to abstain. You do not have to vote. So, for example, let's imagine that nobody voted. So there would be 11 people, nobody voted, and then there would still be 11 people. This, in theory, could happen every time. So if it did happen, then at the end of the show, all 11 people would split the $250,000. Another mechanic on the show is called the vault. Every so often, 2 players or sometimes 1 player is invited to the vault. And in the vault, they get either 1 offer or sometimes 2 offers. And these offers mix up the gameplay a little bit. Like sometimes they involve taking money out of the pot that maybe goes to you, the person taking the offer, if you choose to take it, or canceling certain people's votes randomly, or who knows what else. Also, an important rule about the vault is that players outside the vault, the ones who didn't go in and see these offers, they don't get to know anything about this. So the people who see these offers, they can tell any story they want. They can say there weren't any offers or there were 5 offers, and they can make up the rules of all of them. They don't have to be straight about anything that happened if they don't want. I'm going to give you a sense of how various players approach this game, and it's kind of a mess, but I want to do it mostly without spoilers. I'm not going to say how it ended. I won't necessarily tell you things in the chronological order they happened in. So if you still want to watch the show, I think you'll be able to. I think these players had a really rough time with this game, a rough time understanding the nature of it or what they should even be focusing on. I want to be really conscious of the social aspect of this game. A little bit later, I'm going to tell you about the game design forces are at work, but I'm completely aware that it's also a social game and there's a social element from it. For example, the rules of this game don't have anything to do with, let's say, owls. The birds, owls, but there's nothing stopping a lot of players of the game from believing that the game is about owls if they so choose. Maybe they will only vote for you if you like owls or don't like owls or something like that. And now the whole game is about owls. The first hurdle of these players faced is that none of them are gamers. So in a sense, they're kind of all out of their depth. This is all new stuff to them. And that's totally understandable. And I don't want to hold that against them. They had no idea what they were signing up for. And I mean that literally. In the first episode, there's several comments that indicate they didn't know what they were signing up for. At most, they heard that they had a chance to win money, or maybe that they could compete for a chance to win money, but that's about it. There's something right off the bat that I think really threw these players off. And again, I don't begrudge them for it. I did become really frustrated as time went on that they didn't work through this and fully understand it. But anyway, here's what it is. It's the framing of the money that they can win, the money that's in the pot. It would have been an identical show if they had said there's $250,000 in a pot that, of course, none of you own, but each of you has a chance to win. I'm imagining a silly version where the showrunners really ham up that concept and they make everyone wear a name tag that has $0 on it, and it says the current amount of dollars that you have won so far. Occasionally, because of those vault challenges, that might go up a little bit, but mostly it's going to be 0 for most of the people throughout the game. Functionally, that wouldn't change anything. It would be the exact same game that these players played, but that is not how they perceived it at all. The way this was explained to them is that the $250,000 is put in a trust. And remember, the name of the show is The Trust, which has a double meaning here. The legal term, a trust, is when the property rights of some assets go to a third party who's called a trustee, but then the benefits of those assets go to someone else. So the conceit of calling this a trust in the first place is planting in the minds of the players the idea that this money is actually already theirs. You see, someone else is just holding it, but it's really yours. And it's a cute title, of course, because of the double meaning. Also, the whole show is about trusting each other. Can they decide to trust each other, not to vote each other out and simply split the money? You might think that the distinction I'm making here about how the trust implies that it's already their money versus a different version where they were told explicitly that it's not their money is not really a big deal. I mean, what's the difference? And I might have thought the same thing towards the beginning of the show, but watching all of this and seeing how deep into frankly wrong thinking these players are about this money makes it very clear that it had an effect on them. This whole business about calling it a trust and this concept of, is the money really yours all along, or is it not yours and you try to win it? It reminds me of this experiment in psychology. So in this experiment, they give you a pen, like a pen to write with. It's kind of nice. And then they say, we will buy the pen from you. It's your pen though, okay? But we're offering to buy it for whatever, $2.60. And then a lot of people will turn it down and they'll keep the pen. But then when they reverse it, even on the same people, like if they say, will you buy this pen that I own, will you buy it for $2.60? Then the people don't want to buy it. It's so the same pen is somehow worth a different amount of money if we frame it as my pen that I'm selling versus the pen that you have that you would have to give up. Even though there's not really a difference, when the human brain perceives that it's already mine, you think about it differently. And the reason that's relevant to this show is if you take the total prize pot and you divide by whatever the current number of players are, you take that amount of money, it really seems like that money in each player's head is already theirs. And likewise, that same amount of money is already someone else's and someone else's. So if I make a move that would add to my money, well, it's taking away the money that they already have. That is not actually what's happening, and they do not already have that money. No one has the money. It actually works like any normal game show where it's just zero sum. If you make a move, then you can win more money, and you're hurting other people's chances of winning money or as much money, yes. But that isn't the same as taking it from them. The first big thing that the players of the trust think the game is about and talk about a lot is integrity. That's kind of a big topic. There is one small piece of integrity that I think really does make sense. So I'll start with that one. The idea that somewhere in this game, if you're going to form a voting alliance, which may very well be possible, you hope that you can trust the people that you're voting with enough to do what you think they're going to do. That makes sense to care about from a purely practical, strategic point of view. The problem is that most of the time when the players on the show talk about integrity, they are not talking about that. All of them mention this idea that voting for other people is bad in that it lacks integrity. So a move that helps them win this zero-sum competitive game is bad and lacking integrity. And furthermore, that lying is bad and lacks integrity. Now, hold on. Lying in the real world is generally bad. You should try to avoid lying if you can. Now, there are some cases, really extreme cases, where you really should lie. Like if the Nazi is at your door asking if you're hiding the Jews, you should lie to the Nazi. You really should, even if Kant doesn't think you should. Likewise, in the confines of this competitive game, if there are forces that make it so the correct thing to do to stay alive in the game is to lie, well, then, I mean, you should by definition if you are competing. It doesn't mean you have to do it maliciously or out of the real world or that you're a bad person or that you lack integrity. If the game rules are making you do it, then, I mean, what can you say? The player Brian comes to mind. Now, he is a great man. We should all be so lucky to be as kind as him. I don't like saying a single bad word about Brian because I like him. Brian believes that you shouldn't lie in the real world, and I think that's a great value to have. But he also believes that inside the game, even if the forces are kind of pushing you to do so. I think that's unrealistic and unfair to other players. A different player, Lindsay, has a different point of view, and she's probably the savviest of all of them. Lindsay doesn't really want to lie either, but she understands that if someone else lies, it very well might be because if they didn't, they would get kicked off the show, and that they're doing that for pure survival, or they're doing it for someone else, a teammate, to protect them from getting kicked off the show. So I don't think Lindsay would take it personally or seek retribution or whatever, or judge someone morally harshly if they simply lied within the rules of this game to protect themselves from losing. She would understand that it's just a practicality. I know that's an uncomfortable subject because I wouldn't want to lie either, and you probably don't, but we have to understand there are forces in this show that we'll talk about in a minute that could push you to do that. And it's not just about lying. Let's set lying aside completely and say you don't lie at all. Another concept is voting. Almost every player in this show at one point or another brings up the concept that voting for someone means that you lack integrity. And along the same lines, another thing from Brian, and remember, I really like Brian, is that when he had a chance to take money from the pot in one of those vaults, he didn't do it. And he said the reason was integrity. So in other words, winning money on this competitive zero-sum game show is lacking in integrity. So the headspace that these players are working from is that if they make moves that are legal within the game that increases the amount of money they can win, that they think that that lacks integrity and is bad. This immediately destroys any concept of strategy on the show when you have players working from the assumption that if they were to play better and be more effective, that it is somehow a negative thing, that they somehow shouldn't try to get more money, again, in this competitive game where that is ostensibly the point of it. One line that really upset me was from the player Gasper. Now, Gasper, like Brian, is a great guy in my opinion. I'd love to hang out with him. He's a teacher, and I bet he is a fantastic teacher. So it's uncomfortable to say something negative about him. But there's one thing he said that he should really think about. There's a key point in the game where he could vote for one person or the other or not at all, and it was a difficult decision for him. And in weighing that decision, he flat out said in his confessional, just to the audience, that he was worried about casting a vote which looked like probably the strategically smart vote. He was worried about it because of how it would look to his students, that he would lack integrity by making this move. And I immediately thought back to Survivor Season 1, where the player Kelly said almost the same thing. What happened in Survivor Season 1, that was the beginning of this whole reality show craze. So the players of Survivor Season 1 were not nearly as sophisticated as players in later seasons who were able to watch how Survivor plays out. So in Survivor Season 1, the player Richard Hatch had the idea that he would form a voting alliance, and that was an innovative new idea. Now, it is obviously more powerful to have a voting alliance than to not have one. So it's this kind of a basic playing to win move. But when confronted with this idea, the player Kelly said that she would not join that alliance or any other. And the reason she gave is that she's a mother and someday her daughter is going to see that. And it's so frustrating because you know what her daughter probably would like to see is her mother making smart strategic moves and winning at a competitive game. I don't really like to use the term scrub, which I mentioned in my book, Playing to Win. It's not a term that I came up with. It's just a thing that gamers out there use to talk about a certain concept. And that concept they're talking about is the idea that within a competitive game, a player who makes up rules that are not part of the game rules, they just make up their own rules that hold them back from winning. Well, that's what a scrub is. So we don't have to call it that if you don't like the word, but that's exactly what Kelly was doing. She made up a crazy rule, which was alliances lack moral integrity. And so she held herself back from winning for no reason and thought that would reflect well on herself when her daughter saw it. And I think quite the opposite. And back to the trust, that's exactly the same concept that Gasper was saying. He thinks it's going to reflect well on himself when his students see that he doesn't do a smart move in a competitive game. I think that is a completely backwards concept of what integrity is, and it's frankly disrespectful to the concept of competition. To pay respect to the virtues of competition is to try your best when you're in a competition. It's to make moves that maximize your chance of winning that competition. A second big topic that these players think this game is about is the concept of deserving, of who deserves what. There were several times when I even thought the players Bryce and Julie might be haunted by some kind of deserve demon. Now, on the surface, this talk of who deserves what is totally understandable and relatable and makes sense. The problem is thinking it through. I think the beliefs expressed about who deserves what went totally unexamined and don't actually hold up to scrutiny. This concept of deserving is a little bit hard to talk about because of the player Bryce. Bryce is a millionaire, and yet he is on this show. Now, Bryce, if you happen to be listening to this, I'm not a hater, but I do have to say that several of the things that you said about your wealth and privilege and how it relates to other people on the show were pretty insensitive. I don't want to defend those comments. And I think it was valid for someone to raise the question of, should Bryce really be here when we need the money more than him? So if I'm defending anything at all here, it isn't anything that Bryce said or did. It's more of what he could have said. Julie was expressing that she came from nothing, that she was very poor and she had to work really hard to have anything at all. And so this money means a lot to her. And I believe every word of what she said. But she was implying that Bryce was maybe morally bad for being here at all, and that even if that weren't true, we should vote him off. Well, okay, but let's think about that. Let's think that through, Julie. I think what Bryce could have pointed out is that this is a competitive game. And in general, we don't really care where people are from or how much money they have when they're in a competitive game. What if the competitive game was Jeopardy? Would we see Bryce as bad for answering the questions correctly on Jeopardy? That he would only really be morally virtuous if he intentionally failed to answer the questions so that other people who had a lower salary than him could make more? That's not really how that works. And it's not anything about Jeopardy or games of skill either. What if instead of Jeopardy, it was a rock, paper, scissors tournament? You know, we go like this. Would we also expect him to intentionally play that game badly? Maybe just always do paper or something so he can lose quietly, or else he's morally bad if there's any kind of prize? I don't think so. I wouldn't expect that. I don't think Julie expects that either. But let's say Julie did expect that. Let's imagine if she had said, yeah, if Bryce was on Jeopardy, and I do expect him to play rock, paper, scissors poorly. So what she would be saying is that in basically any competition, we should ignore the actual competition and just determine who needs the prize the most. So if someone has kids, they have dependents, and someone else doesn't. Maybe the one with kids deserves the money more. Even that's a little suspicious. What if the people who don't have kids tried to have kids and couldn't, and should they be penalized for that? Or even if they just don't want to, should they be penalized for that? But whatever, we'll move past that. So whoever has the most hardships is the biggest charity case. Maybe that's who all the money should go to. Now, I don't want to sound callous about this, because if someone really was a charity case and really did need money, then I would empathize with that and understand that. But I just don't think the implication of that is that all competitions kind of have to fold around that. And I don't think Julie thinks that either. The problem with this argument, where I don't think Julie really thought it through, is that if she fully and genuinely believed that argument and expected that Bryce should step down because he is in a better situation than her outside the game, then the natural consequence of that is so should everyone else. And so should Julie, because I think if we added up everyone's hardships outside this game, there were actually some people who are worse off than Julie. And so that would mean that Julie herself should just step down. And I really do not think that she believes that. We need to move on from all that. I want to talk about what this game is actually about, the forces on the players that arise directly because of the rules of this game. So first, before we develop any kind of strategy, we just want to look at the forces. The main thing that you can do in this game is vote. You can either vote or you can abstain and not vote. So should you vote? Well, let's weigh the pros and cons. Let's say it's time to vote and we decide that yes, we will cast a vote. So what are the benefits? The first big benefit of voting is defense. If someone votes for you and then you don't vote, then you're probably going home. But in that same case, if you vote for someone else, and it doesn't even matter if it's the person who voted for you, if you just vote for anybody, then you've created the opportunity to maybe get a tie. Maybe it'll be 1-1 and then you won't go home. So if you do vote, you have some defense, where if you don't vote, you have no defense whatsoever. The second benefit of voting is that you might vote someone out. Your vote might cause you to get a bigger piece of the pie, so you'll win more money. I know that seems to really ruffle the feathers of people on this show, and they think that it lacks integrity or whatever, but it is, again, ostensibly the point of what we're supposed to be doing here is competing for money. So a plus is if you vote, you might make more money. There's a third thing that your vote might accomplish. There could be another player who you want to have a voting alliance with. So maybe you think on future votes, it's going to help to have this player around because they're going to make sure that you are still around. Well, if that's the case, and you think that someone is going to vote for them, then you can cast a vote on somebody else and you can protect them by trying to make that a tie. There's a fourth thing that might happen that's not a benefit, but it's not a negative either. It could be that you cast a vote and it just didn't matter, that it doesn't change the outcome. So there's three positive things that can happen if you vote. You could defend yourself, you could win more money, and you could protect someone who you think will help you later. So let's do the cons now, the drawbacks of voting. There aren't any. There's none. At least from a game theory standpoint, there aren't. We can talk about the social aspect. And now I know you're probably thinking about that it could be a really negative thing if people knew that you voted, because they're just going to vote you out in retribution. That's a fair point. Here's the issue. All of these votes are secret. There's no way to prove what anyone voted. And so you can just always lie. Maybe you don't want to lie. Maybe you don't like lying. Look, we're not thinking about that right now. We're just thinking about what do these rules cause to happen. So there's 3 reasons why you do want to vote. There's no reasons why you don't want to vote, except for the social thing. But the social thing, no one ever has to know about it. The forces pushing you to make a vote already sound overwhelming, but there's another factor. It might sound like a small detail, but it's not. It's a huge factor, actually, that pushes you to vote even more. Now, I was saying that defense was one of the reasons you might want to vote. Somebody's going to vote for you, and so you have to vote to protect yourself. But think about this. What if it's not the case that you know they're going to vote for you? You simply fear it. You simply think they might vote for me. What if there's a 20% chance that they're going to vote for me? Well, in that case, what you can do is you can weigh, on the one hand, a 20% chance to leave the show, or you can not have the 20% chance to leave the show if you vote. So this property right here is actually the defining property of the entire show. And it's what makes the game design of this show so interesting. It actually comes from the fear of maybe someone is going to vote for me. We don't need to have the case where I know you're going to vote for me and then that spirals into a bunch of chaos. All we need is the tiny little push of, I'm afraid that you might vote for me, because if you do, then I have to vote. But then you know that I'm thinking that, and that I'm afraid and I have to vote. And so you have to vote to protect yourselves, and other people pick up on that too. And now it's potentially spiraling out of control and there's crazy crossfire everywhere. Maybe all from just one person being afraid, and maybe justifiably so. So this whole game is incredibly unstable. Even if everyone wanted to just share the money and trust each other, the forces are so strong to pull them apart. If anybody has any doubt at all, the entire thing crumbles. Another thing about this show that I think is good design is it's clear to me that the creators of the show know very well what I'm talking about that force. And so they want to twist the knife in that wound. They want to push it as far as they can go and create uncertainty and doubt and mistrust. So they do that through the mechanism of the vault offers, which I've told you. And because nobody has to be honest about even what the offers are, there's always questions about, oh, what did they decide and what are they up to and what scheme is there? Even if there is no scheme, it looks like there could be. The show also does a whole bunch of activities that are not the voting and not the vault either, that are actually designed to bring about mistrust. And it's genius because if there's just a little bit of a spark of mistrust anywhere that comes from one of those nonsense activities, it can spiral everything into total chaos. So let's think about actually having to play this game. I imagined if I were on this show, what I would even say or do. And I know right off the bat that if I tried to say anything or give any kind of speech that I'm putting myself out there to maybe get voted out. You really don't want to be the focus of anything ever on a show like this. You want to just kind of lay low. Oh yeah, before I tell you what my strategy might actually be, I'm going to tell you a different strategy that I wouldn't do. Maybe you think I would do it, but you'll see why I won't. What follows directly from the forces that I talked about is that you should vote every single time because there's an upside and there's no downside, and you should lie about it every single time. So one way to play this game would be the maximum psychopath way, where you just 100% lie about all of your votes all the time. And you constantly say how you want to share and so on as much as possible. Let's never vote anyone off. Well, unless they're causing trouble, then we have to vote them off, but it's only, to reach harmony. Meanwhile, you are stabbing everyone in the back all the time. I certainly get that strategy and someone could try it, but I would personally be very wary of it. I think it's really risky. That is such an amount of lying and such an amount of act that you would have to put on that are people really going to buy it? You're probably going to be found out. If you're playing the game that hard and making so many moves, it's likely that someone's going to figure it out and just get rid of you. So even though it sounds like a really playing to win strategy, I don't know, pretty risky. So here's what I would try. I would actually go the other way. I try to make this as short as possible, not bore people. I don't want to lecture anybody. I don't want to tell anybody what to do. I don't want to say I'm the leader or anything like that. But I would say, hey, I'm a game designer and this is a game we're playing and there's some very powerful forces here. And I just want to point out what they are. And I know I'm taking a risk by even saying anything about this, but if you vote me off for this, it's not going to change what the forces are. I'm just kind of the messenger here. And then I'd explain that the forces of this game are really pushing everyone to vote all the time. That from anyone's perspective, when they look at everyone else, they would have to think, oh, well, everyone has such a strong force to vote, probably everyone else will. And so everyone is kind of forced to vote all the time just to save themselves. So this game is going to be a very unstable game and it might spiral into just a lot of eliminations. And then I'd say, I'd like to float an idea to the group. We don't have to play it that way. I think if we go into this naively and just expecting everybody to trust each other, that the forces are so strong that even if we want that, it probably will fail. But if we actually address these forces head on, we might be able to overcome them and we might be able to stabilize and just share the money with as many people as possible. Now, I would be paranoid of getting voted out over this because for all I know, a bunch of the other players don't want to do that. So I would ask straight up, I'd just say, hey, I don't even want to tell you about how we would do that if you all don't want to do that. So why don't you tell me, what kind of game do you want us all to play? And I can't really ask you publicly, so we'd have to do a secret vote. If we could just secretly vote, like, do we generally want to be super cutthroat or do we generally want to share the pot? Now on this show, it seems like the result of that vote would be pretty much everyone wanted to share the pot. And so I think a playing to win strategy here is actually just go along with them. Don't try to knock out everybody and be a big problem and risk getting voted out over it. Just be a nice person who's easy to work with and, tries to share. I recognize there's a paradox there because the game rules themselves are saying definitely don't do that. But everyone's vibe and kind of the social rules, which are very powerful in this game, they are pointing in that direction, at least for this group. So if we all want to work together and try to share this money, how are we actually going to accomplish that? I'd say think about how out in the real world, when people need to work together, the way that it actually works is from obligations. It's from liabilities. If your company wants to make a deal with another company, you don't just have to blindly trust that the other company will do everything they say. There's an actual court system where you can sue them. In other words, they have the liability that if they don't do what they say, they get in trouble. And that liability is good. That's what allows you to do business with them. But here within this game, if person A tells person B, oh, they're not going to vote, well, they have no downside. There's nothing we can do about it if they do vote. A big problem here is that we're not going to be able to know that they voted at all. In general, out in the real world where people vote in elections, it's actually a great property that we don't know who voted for what. That anonymity creates a lack of accountability for the person, and that means they are immune to being intimidated into voting a certain way if no one can know how they voted. But here it cuts the opposite direction. We actually wish that all of our votes were public, because if they were, then we could punish each other if anybody didn't, go along with the agreement. Now, I don't know how we can make our votes public, but I'm just pointing out that if we could, then that would actually help all of us. Here's a real small idea. I don't know if it would help very much, but it would help maybe a little bit, is if just before the vote, if we force each other to all look each other in the eye and say definitively, I will not vote tonight or something. If that's the goal, if that's what we all want to do as a team, then yeah, somebody could lie, but shouldn't we make it as hard as possible for them? Shouldn't we make them worry that maybe they're not going to be a good liar and we're going to see it on their face? If they had the fear of us thinking that we're going to detect a lie, well, they might be scared into actually holding up their end of the agreement and not voting. This is ironic because the player Mama J got really bent out of shape when somebody asked her just before the vote, is anyone voting? But I mean, what are we doing here? Are we all working together, or are we all backstabbing each other? If we want to work together, then we should make it as uncomfortable as possible to vote for each other. I don't know how we can go further than that in revealing our votes. Maybe someone else has an idea. Something that would be more effective than that, though, is if we found a way to really obligate ourselves to vote a certain way. So if we all say out loud together that tonight we want to try to not vote anyone off and just share the money, then we all should realize that that's going to be a lot more effective if I can say, you can count on my vote because I have this obligation, this proof that I'm going to follow through with it. I don't know exactly what kind of proof it would be. I'm just going to spitball some things off the top of my head, but I could go to another player and I could say, all right, now I want to get this on camera and I want to make it as close to a legally binding contract as possible. Someday the show is going to air and it will be known at that point how I voted here. So I promise to you now on camera that if I vote for anybody, then I will pay you $100,000 or $10,000, or I'll mow your lawn or whatever. I don't know exactly what kind of obligation makes sense, but I could obligate myself as strongly as possible later outside the show. Would it stand up? Would it be legally binding? I don't know. I could try to make it as close to that as possible. And I certainly would have a lot of social pressure from the rest of the world to do the thing that I said that I was going to do. What I'm really pointing out here is how hilariously far off we are from what the players in the show actually did or ever talked about or thought about. If we were really serious, if it wasn't just a disingenuous thing that we're trying to share the money, if we actually cared about sharing the money, then we should find a way to make promises like this that mean something, that go outside of the show so we can prove what our vote's going to be. The force for us to vote every time is so powerful that we need something on the other side of it to stabilize. There's another thing that we could do that would be really effective if our goal was truly to share the money, as the players on this show said was their goal. But they actually did completely the opposite of what I'm going to suggest. I'm going to quickly list out several of the activities that happened on this show between the voting rounds. The players were asked to stand in a line and rank themselves from most intelligent to least intelligent. The players were asked to stand in a line and rank themselves from best leader to worst leader. Jake had the audacity to put himself first on both of those. Because Jake ranked himself as the best leader, he then had to rank everybody else from most loyal to least loyal. I hope you're starting to see the pattern here. Each one of these things is extremely controversial and is going to make people mad. In each of these cases, the correct strategic move is for someone to stand up and say, hold on, wait a second. My goal is for us to share the money, and that is not going to happen if everybody gets mad at everybody else. If there's any kind of discord that happens, it immediately spirals out of control because of how the forces of this game works. So we should not do this. We should just all walk around randomly and not think of it as having anything to do with how smart anyone is or how good of a leader they are. And Jake, who then had to rank everybody according to how loyal they are, should have said, hold on a second. In business, that's called stack ranking, and it's incredibly controversial. And people quit working at companies just because they will not participate in that kind of horrible thing. So it's ridiculous to think that I'm going to rank people according to loyalty. Are you kidding me? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just randomly yell out numbers and they're not going to mean anything. Now that should be obvious just by hearing about it. But if you look at what happened, it was a total disaster, just like I would expect, and he shouldn't have done it. How about this one? We all have some poker chips and I will yell out something like, who is the best life of the party? And then you give a poker chip to whoever you think that is. And then I'll sneak in, who do you trust the most? And a player who acted really stupidly gave his chip to Lindsay. This was an incredible strategic blunder because Lindsay had really been sticking her neck out to appear to be in one alliance, but to actually be aligned with this guy. And he just outed her like nothing in front of everybody. And it wasn't a small thing or a hypothetical. It immediately and directly led to the other alliance realizing what was going on and caused a huge problem for her, even though he would benefit by helping her. So yet again, the correct strategic answer would be to say, now, wait a minute, I want to share the money here. So I'm going to throw my chip out randomly and it's not going to mean anything. Here's another one. We're going to blindfold everybody. And then we have a bunch of candles in clusters of 3. And next to each cluster of 3 is one of your names. So we'll tap you, you'll take off your blindfold, and you'll go to one of the clusters of 3, and you'll blow out one of the candles of that person. And we'll stop when 3 of someone's candles are blown out. Oh, and by the way, you should blow out the candle of who you think is the biggest liar in the house. There's layers of problems here. First of all, you don't want to be talking about who's the biggest liar in the house for multiple reasons. It's going to sow discord and spiral everything out of control. And second, even if you really did think someone was the biggest liar in the house, how does blowing out their candle actually help here? It just gives away information that you or enough people thought that, but why does that help you to give away that information? There's so many of these examples that I hope the players would eventually figure it out, that all the stuff about giving away information only hurts their own stated goals and that they really shouldn't do it. They should collude to all randomize this information so that they can be more successful. But they never got anywhere near even thinking about that. And the most extreme example comes somewhat towards the end. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that this happened because I'm not going to say the results of it. But one of the activities was everybody was given an envelope with their personal voting history for the entire show. Then we all go around in a circle one by one and we can reveal our own voting history to everybody. And if we do, we put some pittance into the pot. This is a terrible idea. Now, Brian was asked to go first. And if I were on this show, I would say, hold on a second, Brian. Let me say something before you open that envelope. I think what you are thinking is that you have been honest the whole time. So there's no reason for you not to open your envelope. And I think that you're about to open it. And I don't question your honesty at all. But I urge you to think about the strategy of what you're doing. Let's assume that you never lied, and let's assume that you prove that. You know what you do by proving that is you put a force on the next person to do the same and the next to do the same. That if someone doesn't follow your example, they're going to seem like the odd one out and they're going to be afraid that we're going to vote them out. So the result of your action, the predictable result, is that we're going to end up seeing either everyone's votes or almost everyone's votes. So is that what you want? Because it seems to contradict with what you say you want. What you say you want is for us all to share this money. But do you think that if it turns out somebody lied, I don't even mean me, maybe her, maybe him, who knows? If somebody here, probably a few people, have lied in the past about what they voted on, this is going to spiral into chaos. Someone's going to say, oh, we can't trust them. Someone's going to be afraid that maybe a vote will happen. And so they're going to have to do a defensive vote. It's going to be a massacre. So I submit that what actually matters, what we should all really think about and care about, is can we go into these last votes fully trusting each other from now on, even if we had to do what we had to do to get here. So for heaven's sakes, please don't open that envelope. Another way of putting all this is that the game design that went into this show is very good because it's poking and prodding the players all the time to spiral into chaos. And so really the correct move, if you are a player who doesn't want the game to spiral into chaos and kind of wants to share, is to subvert this as much as possible, is to fight it, is to all work together specifically against any kind of information that's going to set us at each other's throats. Even if the player's approach to playing this game was pretty frustrating to me at times, the strength of the rule design of all of this really made it pretty good entertainment anyway. It's unusual to see a competitive situation like this that is so on the razor's edge all the time. We've had over 20 years of Survivor having dramatic votes all the time, but a key difference there is that if there is an alliance that gets bigger than another voting alliance, then the bigger one has control and they don't really have to worry about the smaller one most of the time. But in this show, in the Trust, if there's just one person outside your alliance, that one person can wreck everything. One single vote can knock out someone in your alliance. So between that and all of these activities that are designed to sow discord, it's pretty entertaining. And if you enjoyed this story, you might enjoy my tabletop game Pandante, which is also all about lying. It's a little like poker, except it's designed to be fun without playing with real money. And it's also designed to glorify whoever can come up with the biggest bluff or lie and get away with it. And it usually ends with a lot of laughter. You can get it at sirloingames.com.